Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cascadia Daily News conference room in downtown Bellingham. We're here to do a citizens agenda candidate for public office interview with Doug Chadwick, who's a candidate for Whatcom County Sheriff. Welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Around the room here is, to your immediate right is Ralph Schwartz, our local government reporter at Cascadia Daily News, experienced local reporter, Cynthia Pope, our publisher. And my name is Ron Judd. I'm the executive editor, and that's a job I've had since August 2021. And I also serve as the opinion page editor at Cascadia Daily News. And so part of my job is to manage our Citizens Agenda program, which, as I'm sure you've read, is our way of putting the agenda for, part of the agenda for what people discuss in the coming November election in the hands of readers, voters. And so briefly, our process for that is, this is the second year we've done this. It was very successful last year. We spend a couple months soliciting questions from reader voters about what they want folks like yourself to be talking about on the campaign trail. And this is a program that's worked successfully around the country, in fact, around North America, to change the focus of election coverage from horse race style coverage to issues that people are really concerned about in local communities. It's not the entirety of what we discuss in our news coverage process or in our separate endorsement process, which is something that's managed by our editorial board. Those are separate issues, separate processes. But it helps set the stage in a way that it's a starting point, I think, to talk to candidates about what people are concerned about. So we put those questions out to the great masses, and we received, I don't know, probably 150 questions in return from people. We put those questions then were published in our newspaper and on CascadiaDaily.com, and we asked people for, specifically for the sheriff's race, to pick 3 questions that were important to them in terms of crime and justice and police issues. And those questions now are in our hands, and we've submitted them to the candidates, and you've provided us with some really excellent, eloquent answers to those questions. So I want to start out just with going over those, both for the benefit of the public and to give you a chance to add anything that you want to add to those. So 2 of the 3 questions were, in my mind, related, and they talked about the interplay between policing and criminal justice and community services and diversion programs and officer training. And it seems like on the mind of the public very much when it comes to this subject is encounters between law enforcement and our criminal justice system, between citizens, and at what point does our process of a society, as we kind of rethink criminal justice these days, at what point do those first encounters really matter, and how do they matter, and how do we manage that? So those 2 things, those 2 questions were separate questions. One from readers were asking about training specifically for first responders. The other one was about, I'm looking them up here, hang on a second. The first question, that the winning question, was, what specifically will you do within the first 90 days of your term to fund and provide community-based services for income support, housing, behavioral health, and substance use disorder treatment, including harm reduction? And I realize that those are not things that you as sheriff would control and be able to wave a magic wand and provide funding for, but it is something that affects you and your officers in terms of the way that you approach the public. And your answers, you said in the first 30 days you'd hold town meetings to seek input on community's thoughts about this subject and what people think are the most important issues facing various communities. You talked about the delivery and crisis of delivery of crisis and social services in rural parts of Whatcom County are limited in scope right now due to resources, and you see a need there for more. And then you called out the need to support existing programs that serve those purposes now, like the LEAD program, which is a diversion program, Crisis Stabilization Center, providing drugs to deal with overdose deaths, to prevent overdose deaths. And you also said you'd seek funding for a homeless navigation center, mitigating risk of people who are released from jail and return to the streets. So I just want to give you an opportunity to add to those answers if you want. And my observation in reading them was that you largely have supported here existing programs, except for one or two other things you mentioned. So tell us about ways that your scheme of that solution to that problem might be in addition to what's existing now.
Sure. Like you said, there's over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of voices about public safety and crime, and you can't have those discussions without also having the conversation about homelessness, mental health, and addiction, whether it's drug or alcohol. And as you said, and I noted in my answer, that's not necessarily within the scope and the purview of the sheriff's office. As sheriff, I would be focused on law enforcement, corrections, and emergency management. But we can't ignore the fact that there's an intersection between law enforcement and all those community-based services that are important to the community, because at the end of the day, they're all interrelated. That's not necessarily, homelessness and addiction is not necessarily a problem for law enforcement to solve. We get called when things have devolved to the point where there's criminal activity or people don't feel safe, but we're certainly not the solution to the problem. That's a solution that society as a whole is going to has been wrestling with and needs to solve, and we're certainly a part of that conversation. So I would certainly support, and I do support, those community-based programs. And over the last 4 or 5 years I've been involved, probably the bulk of the meetings that I sit in are not necessarily focused on law enforcement, but that intersection and how law enforcement can basically be a go-between between people in crisis and the services that they need. So we already have programs. I helped develop the behavioral health deputy program. We currently have 2 deputies that are assigned, and their primary focus is responding to calls that have some kind of nexus to mental health or substance abuse, especially those folks that are calling on a regular basis and just are not getting the help that they need. So they work with the GRACE program, the LEAD program, and other programs to try and get people plugged into services so that law enforcement necessarily or other first responders aren't necessarily being called. And we can send out, maybe people that are better equipped to deal with persons in crisis and have that training and background. Because while law enforcement, we do have that training and we're mandated to have mental health and violence de-escalation training, that's not, we're probably not the best resource to help people get to the next stage and help them stabilize and become productive members of society. So that's, so I would continue to build on that. I think we've done a good job at the sheriff's office already, but there's certainly more that we can do. As far as what we do within the jail, we do have some harm reduction programs that we've implemented. We obviously have Narcan available, and all deputies have that available to them because we increasingly run across people that are overdosing on dangerous drugs in the community. So that's a life-saving tool that we have to make sure that they still have the opportunity to seek that treatment and hopefully better their lives. The other thing we have is a medically assisted treatment program specifically towards opioid addiction. So people that come in, and there's probably 75% of the people in there are on that program, and they receive medication, Suboxone, that kind of helps them, one, not go through withdrawal, but addresses the dependence issue to opioids so that they don't, it's painful, it's uncomfortable. So just trying to manage that for them while they're in our care, because at the end of the day, while they're in custody, we're responsible for their safety and their security. So we take that very seriously. As far as I'd like to see more behavioral health and medical and treatment services in the jail, but we don't have the space to do that. We have a very small medical unit, and it's not 24/7. And as you know, we have 2 corrections facilities. We have the downtown jail, and then we have the work center. And so it's important to have medical staff available. Unfortunately, when they're not there, if we do have a medical emergency, we call 911 like anybody else. We have a lot of corrections deputies that are trained EMTs as well, but we call in Bellingham Fire and medics to help us and transport people to the hospital if they have a medical emergency. And then finally, I'd ask for funding for both either the county council or the state to help support navigator positions. We have a few in the county, and really their role is to, when somebody's leaving the jail, to make sure that there's that warm handoff, that they're going directly to services. And sometimes that's going to be housing, sometimes that's going to be mental health or medical treatment that they need. Right now, when you're released, and it's all predicated on once your time is served, we can no longer legally hold you and we release you. And for a lot of people, that may be at off hours of the day or night. There may not be buses going, or they may not have transportation. So when they leave the facility, if there's nobody there to help them get to that next stage, they walk downtown a couple blocks and probably run into the same circumstances where drugs are available, and they find themselves right back into the same situation that ended up getting them arrested and booked into the jail. So I would like to see some kind of homeless navigation center. Not necessarily, there's other resources, and Whatcom County has done a great job of improving the resources, but they're not enough to meet the need. Right. There's not enough bed space for people that seek treatment. There's, I know they're in the process of building the way station, but that's still probably a year out. And that's really gonna help people that are on the streets, but those people that are leaving the jail, if there's not somebody there, again, they're gonna go right back to what they were doing. And if they've been in jail for a while and they use, their tolerance is down, and it increases the chances of overdose. So I would advocate for a facility right there next to the jail, so they can just walk across the street. Somebody can walk them across. They've got temporary housing. They've got counselors and people that can get them to mental health or drug treatment. Depending on how long they're there, maybe somebody can help them with some financial assistance if they do own their own home, or help them find some more long-term housing, and then help them with some job searches if that's an option for them. But again, at the end of the day, when they're in our custody, our goal shouldn't necessarily be treatment, because hopefully they're not there that long. It should be about stabilizing them and kind of keeping them safe until they transition and there's somebody there to help them.
Okay. The other part of that, and I think it segues really well, is the question about training specifically for your people. The training that there is fairly extensive training, and this process was an eye-opener to me, who doesn't understand the state requirements for training of officers, and they're pretty extensive. Are they enough? And do you think we should do more? And if so, what?
Again, at the Sheriff's Office, we do a lot of training. I've been a trainer for a lot of years, and I put a significant emphasis on that, and I have. As I've moved up in the organization, I've really focused on making sure that our instructors are getting a lot of training and good training, and then they come back and train the rest of our staff, as well as some of the smaller jurisdictions that may not have the resources or the trainers to facilitate that. So we try and pull them into our training, because at the end of the day, they're going to support us and we're going to support them. We do receive mental health training. As you can see there, if you look up the WAC and the RCW, by state law, new recruits in the academy are required to have 200 hours of violence de-escalation and mental health training. For current police officers, they're required to have 40 hours every 3 years. Some of that doesn't kick in until probably 5 years down the road from now. But there's also crisis intervention training, 8 hours of crisis intervention. So we've accomplished that at the Sheriff's Office. We have had mental health training. Our behavioral health deputies get advanced training in mental health, and then they can bring that information back to the deputies at either a shift briefing, or we now have overlap days on Thursdays where everybody's working and we can provide that training. So there is training for mental health de-escalation, but at the end of the day, we're not the resource that is going to help somebody seek treatment, either mental health or substance use. So we have to be knowledgeable, and we need to be able to recognize people in crisis, but we also need to know what resources are available and get them there. So that's really what that co-responder model is about that I talked about. It's partnering our law enforcement deputies with behavioral health specialists so that they're responding together. If they respond together in the field, they're arriving at the same time, and the most appropriate resource should step forward and the other one steps back. They have a different program in the city of Bellingham, which is the alternative response team, where they send out nurses, medical staff with behavioral health specialists, and there's not a law enforcement presence, but if they need somebody, law enforcement is close. I know I talked with some of the city council members when they were proposing this. Council member Hamill was very passionate about it, and I insisted from a county perspective that for the safety of those behavioral health specialists and everybody involved, that it was better to have law enforcement initially respond just from a safety perspective, because if they go to Glacier by themselves, one, they may not have self-service. Two, if something happens, and these things evolve very, they're very volatile and they can evolve very quickly. So it's important that somebody's there for their safety. And I know talking to some of the folks that do that job, they don't necessarily feel safe without law enforcement. Because again, the people that they're trying to help, depending on what their crisis is, they can be dangerous. So that was the idea between the co-responder model, was to have law enforcement and behavioral health specialists respond at the same time. And then again, if we're not needed, we can leave. If they're in the car with us, that's problematic, because now one of us has to stay. If it's a law enforcement issue, now I have a behavioral health specialist sitting in the car for 3 hours and vice versa. So I know they have a vehicle now available. Ideally, they would respond at the same time with us. And then once things are stabilized, one of us can leave and the other one can finish the job that's needed.
Okay.
So
the other question that was asked by readers is one of the delightfully simple ones, and you've already touched this in a couple ways because it's obviously such a big issue, which is, will you support building a new jail in Whatcom County, and why?
Well, the simple answer is yes. I think the current jail has been inadequate for decades, and I know we've been working on that as a community, as a county, and we just haven't gotten there. But I think I've seen a change in that discussion where for the last 5 years it was really either it was you supported a jail and incarceration, or you supported treatment, and there was no middle ground. I think as a society and as a community, we understand that it's not an or, it's an and. We need a new jail to keep the public safe, because unfortunately there are some people that, because of the level of violence and the ongoing danger that they present, we have to protect the public from them. And then there's other people that are certainly amenable and are appropriate to go through treatment. So I think, like I said, we need a facility that is adequate to meet the current needs as well as future needs as Whatcom County grows, and it's growing at a rapid rate. I was born and raised here. I have been to a lot of places, and I haven't found some place I like better than this for a lot of reasons, and unfortunately a lot of other people have found that out as well. Exactly. It's a beautiful place to live. It's a relatively safe place, and I certainly want to keep it that way. So we need a jail that meets the community's needs, but that also means a facility that is large enough to have space for medical, mental health, substance use treatment. And when I say treatment, it shouldn't be considered a treatment facility, because hopefully people aren't there that long. Mm-hmm. It should be a point of intervention for people that end up in custody, where we can provide them some resources, we can get them stabilized, and then again, when they leave, there's that warm handoff where somebody's there to help them find that temporary housing, maybe help them with employment and treatment and counseling options. So we need that. The other thing that we don't have, and people ask, well, why don't you have all these educational and vocational programs? The real simple answer is we don't have the space. And if we had the space, we could have those programs. I went with a group to Nashville, and they had some very good programs, art, music. They actually had a program where they were teaching people how to cut hair. So they would do that for everybody there, and then they've got a vocation they can do when they leave. So again, I certainly support any of those educational or vocational programs where they can learn a skill. And then there's other programs where they learn life skills, parenting skills, or some of the cognitive therapy programs where if you're involved in domestic violence, they look at the root cause and controlling your behavior and anger management and things like that. So again, there's just not the space for those type of programs and those kind of services. And that's, I think, where we are as a community, is they understand we can build a jail to meet our needs, but it has to have these services as well.
It's an interesting point you made about space, because it seems like in the mind of the public, the quick connection between jail and cost and space is all about cells and numbers of people who are going to be incarcerated. But your point about space is that the kind of facility we need needs to be bigger, even with the same number of people in it, right?
Yeah. And again, just because you have space doesn't mean you have to fill it.
Right.
I was just down with a group at Snohomish County Jail. They have a little over 1,000 beds. They're at about 50% capacity. They've never been on booking restrictions, even during COVID. And again, part of that is people are moving through the system. They're getting them to where they need to go. Either their cases are being resolved or they're moving them on to some kind of diversion or treatment program. So again, just because you have a large facility with beds doesn't mean they're all filled. If things are, but you still have the capacity if there's a need. And again, if there's not a need for those beds, maybe you expand that to more programs and other services. But the facilities we've toured and looked that have a adequate medical facility, and part of that is when people are being treated in the current jail, the medical unit's so small, or they're doing some kind of mental health or substance use counseling and having those conversations, there's really no area to have that privacy. And it's hard to, you want to respect people and do it with dignity, and it's hard to do that when there's a bunch of other people around you. You can't have those, because that is a private conversation.
Sure, sure. Okay, thanks for those answers about the citizens' agenda questions. I'm going to move on to some more general questions and invite my colleagues here to chime in with something. Ralph, you got a question?
I have a question that would follow up on what was just said, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You were saying that a couple times, I think, that you didn't see a jail as a place for treatment because people won't be in there for a long time. But, the warm handoff maybe to treatment afterwards. But my understanding is the county council was discussing something, I'm not sure what they called it, a behavioral care center or something adjacent to the jail, where qualifying offenders, shall we say, might actually get into what I thought might be a treatment program. Is that something you support? Is that sort of jail adjacent behavioral care center with a few dozen beds for people who are low risk and who are amenable to treatment? Is that some part of your vision for the new jail?
Yeah, I certainly, the concept of the behavioral care center actually came out of that trip to Nashville.
Yeah.
And we toured that, and it's actually part of the jail. It's voluntary, but it is in custody.
Right.
So what they do is after they've been booked, they do an assessment and they look at the charges, and the next morning the public defender, the prosecutor, and then people from the behavioral care center get together and go, okay, these people would be a good candidate for this program. And it's intended to be a 30-day, 30 days is really what they're looking at. It could be longer. I think a lot of people, for whether it's mental health treatment or substance use disorder, 30 days is probably not enough for an actual treatment program, but it certainly will help people stabilize and provide them some of the skills so that when they leave, they can maybe go to a longer term treatment facility. The other thing we've heard from some people is if you have a treatment facility right next to the jail, people would be less inclined to go because there's that, they see the jail and it's just, it gives a negative connotation. So I know there's other treatment facilities around Whatcom County and Bellingham that are being built. So I certainly support the behavioral care center concept, either adjacent to the jail or right there next to it for people that would benefit from that program. But the reason I say it's not a treatment program is just the length of time that they're going to be there. We start somebody in a program and 2 days later they're released, they're not going to benefit from that program.
So on average, how long are people in custody in our jail?
I think that average bed days I think is a little over 20 days. You've got some people that'll get booked in and released the next day. They go to court, have their day in court, and then they're released either on personal recognizance or maybe they set bail. Depending on if it's a violent crime, generally they're not going to be released, or there's going to be a significant bail amount to ensure their compliance and they come back for their day in court. But the average bed days are, I believe, just a little over 20. And again, you've got some people that have been in that jail for going on 2 years. And again, if you look at what a jail is for a year or less. Anybody that's sentenced to more than that. But if you're waiting for your day in court and you have to wait for competency at Western State, that's taking 6 months or more to get people down just for a competency evaluation so they can actually be deemed to go to court, or they're waiting for a public defender or an attorney for their case. So there's a lot of other things, and then the backlogs in the court. So people are staying in jail that haven't necessarily been convicted or sentenced because of the backlog.
We've written about that.
Yeah, I know. Some of this stuff sounds familiar. Yeah, for sure.
I read the Cascadia Daily.
Good to hear.
I have like a different switch of tracks here. One of my thoughts, thinking about law enforcement from a national perspective, comes home to roost here. So my question is, if you were, assuming you're Whatcom County Sheriff and a law change occurs in our state, either by legislative mandate or initiative, that is a law that maybe you don't personally agree with, or feel like your constituents don't agree with, or you feel is constitutionally questionable, would you enforce that law to its fullest extent, and why or why not?
Well, again, as sheriff and as a sworn law enforcement officer, we certainly swear to uphold the Constitution of both the United States and the state of Washington. But at the end of the day, we're law enforcement officers. We enforce the law. We don't make decisions on the constitutionality of a law. That is for judges to decide. So, like I said, as a sheriff, you can voice your thoughts and your perspectives, especially from your constituents, and hope that both the legislature and the courts hear that. But again, at the end of the day, that decision is for the courts, and we are bound to enforce the law.
Okay. My other question is more personal to you. What is, if you're elected as sheriff, what is the most immediate difference people would notice between the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office under you and under your predecessor, Bill Elfo, who was a capable sheriff for many, many years? How would your administration be different?
I think when you look at what we've done over the last, especially the last 5 years, I've learned a tremendous amount from Sheriff Elfo. He's been a great leader. I think the Sheriff's Office is the lead law enforcement agency in Whatcom County for a lot of reasons. We hire good people, not that other agencies don't, but we spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that we have quality people, that we provide adequate training, provide the best equipment and resources that we can for the men and women that work for the Sheriff's Office. But at the end of the day, I think probably the biggest difference between myself and Sheriff Elfo is probably what I've done with that intersection between law enforcement and services. I've been involved in those conversations, like I said, before the GRACE program or any of those on the ground floor, and how to integrate that with law enforcement. Not that the sheriff doesn't support those, but he's been doing this job for just under 50 years, and he is he's a law enforcement officer. And I would say I'm probably more of a when it comes to the social services and some of the social programs, I'm probably a little more open to those, and have really worked on the behavioral health deputy program, our integration with LEAD, the co-responder program, and hopefully establishing more navigators, the homeless navigation center, those kind of things. So while I'm fiscally conservative, I'm probably more of a social moderate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I got some questions in the can here I'd like to bring out. And this one has to do with the law and order side of your job. Looking at 3 different types of crime and some recent legislation. The pursuit law was recently beefed up a little bit. The drug use law was also, there was a new law there this year in the session, as you're well aware, I'm sure. And I'm also interested in retail theft, shoplifting, which is sort of a city problem, maybe more so than an unincorporated county problem. But looking at all 3 of those, my question is did the state legislature do enough to beef up the pursuit law and to create a new law for drug use? We'll start with those 2.
Sure. The changes while the legislature did make some changes in the pursuit laws, obviously they moved from probable cause to reasonable suspicion, but again, it's a limited list of crimes. Prior to that, we could pursue under reasonable suspicion for any crime. And that's, I know, there were some in the legislature that were pushing to return to that. And I would I support that because we put a lot of emphasis and a lot of training into training our folks, not just emergency vehicle operation and driving, but also the decision making that goes along with that. So balancing the risk to the public if they're not apprehended to if we let them go, or if there's a pursuit, if it's a dangerous subject, at what point are we risking the motoring public or pedestrians or people riding their bike, those kind of things. So we've always had robust pursuit laws or pursuit procedures at the sheriff's office. We do it annually. And again, part of that is going over the policy and decision making about when you shouldn't pursue. And it's really for the supervisors and even the deputies. No deputy will ever be questioned for not pursuing. You know, that's part of our policy. So if they make that decision themselves, but if they do get in a pursuit and the supervisor that's monitoring that goes, okay, we're, you know, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody out on the road, it's a violent felony, and we need to get that person into custody as opposed to leave them outstanding to further commit crimes, then they would probably continue that. But again, I think with the policies and the training and the quality of people that we hire, that I would be good with going back to what we did as far as going back to reasonable suspicion for any crime and leaving that discretion and that decision making to the law enforcement professionals. Because right now it's very convoluted about what we can and can't, and it's like I said, even though it's reasonable suspicion, it's still a fairly short list of crimes. As far as the drug laws, prior to the changes, possession used to be a felony, and it was changed to a misdemeanor, but in order to make an arrest, you had to referral twice to treatment. So that was one of the changes. With the recent changes, there's no longer the requirement that we refer them to treatment, which again was a discussion in the card of here's who to call for treatment. And unfortunately, most people are not that are addicted are not walking around saying if there was only a bed for me to seek treatment, I'd go. There has to be some kind of incentive or point of intervention for a lot of people to get there. And I've experienced that personally with family members, and I know addiction is, until they're ready to go, it's a very difficult place for them to be and for the families to be. So now it's an arrest, possession is and use is an arrestable offense, but again, it's still a gross misdemeanor, which is usually a citation. It's not a bookable offense. With the booking restrictions we have, that's not something that we are taking into, we're not booking people into jail for that. So that's the changes in the drug laws. And again, before that, when people were booked on the possession, if they got into drug court, there was at least that point of intervention and somebody that was trying to steer them towards treatment in order to resolve their criminal charges. We don't have that anymore, and I think we're seeing the impacts of that. And then the third one you asked about was?
And this is, again, this might be more a question for City of Bellingham people, right? But retail theft, shoplifting, it seems that it's a huge problem for retailers. It's a problem of a sense of safety for shoppers, for that matter. Yeah. And what can a sheriff's department or sheriff's office do to help that problem, countywide?
Sure. Again, the sheriff's office, just because we're primarily responsible for unincorporated Whatcom County, we don't have a lot of stores and shoplifting, which for us would be a theft third. It's not we don't have a specific city ordinance on shoplifting, but for most people, based on the dollar amount, it'd be a misdemeanor. It's not going to be a felony, but it's more of a city issue. But from the sheriff's perspective, again, if we have those people that continue to do it, and right now there's no penalty for doing it. It's a low-level crime. It's a property crime. It's not something we're booking people into jail in, and I know that frustrates the public. And a lot of that is, we look at when we talk about increases in crime, that's one of the things that people are seeing an increase of. It's the property crimes that's associated with homelessness, mental health, and addiction. And unfortunately, for a lot of those people, they are stealing either to steal food, just to survive. So some of that is, or they're stealing things to sell and buy drugs to support their addiction. So I think, again, if we go back to, as a society, trying to address some of the issues with homelessness, mental health, and addiction, maybe we can reduce some of those property crimes and the things that the law enforcement ultimately gets called to address.
Okay. could go again. I'm just looking at you guys, making sure it's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So when the City of Bellingham's Immigration Advisory Board kicked off in 2020, the number one concern expressed, I think, by that group, by the immigrant community, was local law enforcement's relationship with federal agencies like Customs and Border Protection. So keeping in mind concerns of, again, the immigrant community and their sense of safety, how do you see that relationship between the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office and, say, CBP or the federal border agencies?
Sure. Obviously, we're a border county, so we have a long history of working with all our federal partners, and that's not just CBP. That's Federal Bureau of Investigations, Drug Enforcement Administration, all the Homeland Security investigations. So again, we work with them because obviously, as a border county, there are people coming and going across the border that are involved in criminal activity. Either they're fleeing from criminal activity or they're smuggling something, whether it's drugs, guns, things like that across the border. The Sheriff's Office does not enforce, nor do we have the authority to enforce immigration law. That's not within the purview of the Sheriff's Office. We work with our federal partners to include CBP when it comes to criminal activity. And again, they support us with resources when we have felons that are fleeing, either pursuits or somebody's, a lot of times when people run into the rural parts of the county, and it's dangerous to send law enforcement officers at them, especially if they're armed. We have canines that we use for that to track, but we also use aircraft. Unfortunately, the Sheriff's Office doesn't own our own, but we have that working relationship with CBP where if their resources are available, they will support us, and we've been very successful in finding violent felons and people that pose a risk to the public with their assistance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I have one more on my list. I'm just going to keep rolling here. And this is wearing your hat as with the Division of Emergency Management, thinking about two emergencies potentially. So two-part question. The first part is, what were the lessons learned by that division from the 2021 floods? Maybe if something like that happens again, what might happen that's better, or not even to say that anything terribly wrong happened in 2021 from your position, but just lessons learned and maybe opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think there were lessons learned, and not just as an organization, but from my own perspective, things that we could. I'm all for continuous improvement, and one of the things that we learned is we did not have enough resources to basically respond and support that initially. I think there's a lack of understanding from a lot of people about emergency management and what it does. It's not necessarily a response capability. It's there to support and provide resources in support of jurisdictions that have tapped their resources. So when the floods hit Everson and Sumas, everybody in those communities was boots on the ground, and they were responding to the floods. Not that the Sheriff's Office, we had limited resources. Patrol deputies have patrol cars. Like everybody else, they can't drive out in the water. We do have some vehicles that are higher that we use. We use some surplus military vehicles that have very high clearance, and we can go into the water with those and help rescue people, and we have done that. We are overseas search and rescue, which is all volunteers, and they provide a tremendous resource to Whatcom County. While the Sheriff's Office is responsible for search and rescue, we have 3 coordinators. So we can't do it without the search and rescue volunteers. They had a couple boats, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, farmers and community members with tractors went in there and helped those people that we couldn't get to in Sumas because it was cut off from the rest of the county. So lessons learned is what we didn't have enough resources, and that includes equipment. So in this last budget cycle, I advocated for more staff out at the emergency management, one to staff the EOC. So we've added a financial accountant to manage and deal with all the grants and the funding, both state and federal, that come into emergency management. We've added a EOC manager to help ensure that that facility is at a state of readiness and ready to support whatever community needs it. And hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we will have a communications specialist to not just be able to communicate during a disaster, but get information out to the public to educate them and let them know what resources are available and also what Whatcom County's done to prepare. We purchased 2 additional boats for the Sheriff's Office that either we can use or use in conjunction with search and rescue. And then the other thing that we've done, there was one other thing I was thinking about, now I've lost it. Incident management team. So one of the things that we struggled with anytime we struggle with this in COVID, we struggle with this during the floods, is once you, under ICS, there's different sections. You've got operations sections, planning sections, logistics sections, financial sections. You've got, your incident command. There are seats at the table that have to be filled, and historically the Sheriff's Office has filled those roles. We don't have the manpower to do that because, again, we're responsible for 24/7 operations. So we really rely on other government agencies, other government departments. We've got our finance people coming in, people from the exec's office, people from planning, from public works. But we also need people from other jurisdictions. But if you're in Everson and Sumas and that's where the flood is, that's where you need to be. So we can be there calling and helping get the resources to them. But when they're not the community that's affected, we also need them to come into that incident management team and staff those different sections. So it's very, very labor intensive to do it, especially if you're doing it on usually it's at least a 12-hour cycle, sometimes it's a 24-hour cycle. And those operational periods go anywhere from a day to, COVID lasted for, a year. So so that's one of the things we're working on, to train people to work in those different sections rather than just show up. It's like when you show up here, you're going to work in logistics, or when you show up, you're going to work in finance, as opposed to if you put me in finance, we're going to have problems. But if you put me in operations, we should be fine.
Yeah, right.
So anyways, those are some of the things that we worked on. And then just the notification and letting people know earlier. Unfortunately, that was a flood that nobody predicted. Nobody, if we knew it was going to be like that, that response and the response leading up to it would have been much different. But we need to consider that. And, Mother Nature is, we are no match for Mother Nature.
Yeah, and on that same thought, and this would be a very different type of emergency, wildfire. Climate scientists are saying that Western Washington is going to be more fire prone with wildfire in the coming years, and we have a fire in eastern Whatcom County right now, for that matter, in national parkland. How much is that on your radar, and what can the Division of Emergency Management do to better prepare for that scenario, let's say in what are known to be high-risk communities like Glacier, Kendall, et cetera?
We do have a wildfire plan. They do exercises and training with other both state, local, and federal agencies. We're working, while we're not down there responding, we're certainly paying attention to situational awareness with the Park Service down there for the sourdough fire, and well aware of that. But we've had fires out in east parts of Whatcom County, so that is certainly a concern and something that emergency management has plans for. They train for it. Again, tabletop exercises, and again, I think it's something that they're going to continue to work on and refine.
Okay. All right. Well, that tapped me out. I got all my questions answered anyhow.
Cynthia?
Well, I'm always amazed at the geography of Whatcom County. You've got from the ocean all the way to the Okanagan, and I would think it for your office would be really challenging to cover all that different area. What do you find the most challenging, and what changes would you make in the future to address
Sure, I think obviously Whatcom County is large. It's larger than the state of Delaware. And we have jurisdiction for all that, to include the water, and we have Point Roberts which is unique in and of itself. We have historically we've had 2 deputies that live up there, so we have 2 resident deputies so that they're there and able to respond quickly. Currently, we only have 1 just because of some of the staffing issues we've had over the last couple of years. But we're in a pretty good position and hope to replace that position very shortly. But just the geography of Whatcom County creates some challenges. You may or may not know, but our minimum staffing for Whatcom County is a sergeant and 4 deputies for an area the size of
Yeah.
the state of Delaware. So now granted, we try and structure that so that we have overlap in our shifts during peak hours. We have a day shift, we have a swing shift, and we have a night shift. But there are times where you only have a supervisor and 4 people out there for all of Whatcom County. Now, can we ask for mutual aid from Everson, Sumas, Blaine, Ferndale, Bellingham? We can and we do, and they do the same with us. But just the geography from going from the west side to the east side of Whatcom County, you have rivers you have to cross, mountains you have, and foothills you have to go around, so it creates challenges, and part of that is communications. There are parts of Whatcom County that either have very poor or no radio communications. And the people that live in those areas, that is certainly a safety concern and something that we've been working on. We've done some upgrades recently, but we partnered with the City of Bellingham and WTA to switch over to a new system that hopefully gets us better coverage throughout Whatcom County, to include the east parts of Whatcom County. So I would say just the geography and just the distance our deputies have to go to respond to calls for service. And then those radios are really the lifeline for our deputies and the citizens that live in those areas. So it's important that they have good communications, both radio and then cell phone. We've seen some improvements with cell service in the east parts of the county, because that's been a challenge as well, because it's not just the cell phones, but our computers in the car run on cell service. So once we get in those east parts of the county, they don't have access to some of the resources and the information that they need.
Challenging.
How do you feel about the recent discussion about the sheriff's position being appointed versus elected?
I think you sent me an email about that.
What's that?
You sent me an email about that.
or a press release.
Yeah.
Ironically, Councilmember Donovan and myself agree, in part. I think the position of sheriff, the most qualified person should be the sheriff. Mm-hmm. We just disagree on how that decision's made. I think that decision should be made by the people, based on qualifications, based on experience. And if you look at the history of law enforcement, we started with the political era of law enforcement, where unqualified, untrained people were appointed to be law enforcement by politicians. And that at the end of the day, you're beholden to those, and it was fraught with corruption. So that's why they moved away from that era of law enforcement. And again, I think it's important that people have a say, and with an elected sheriff, the sheriff is accountable to the people, and responsive to the people. And I think every 4 years you get your performance evaluation, and it's based on how you serve the citizens of Whatcom County. And I would hate to see that become an appointed. Other jurisdictions have done that. King County is currently the only one that has an appointed sheriff. They had an appointed sheriff. They went back to an elected sheriff, and now they're back to an appointed. I believe Pierce County had an appointed sheriff at one point. So I think at the end of the day, and I think we saw that most people, and again, sheriff is a nonpartisan position, and it really should be, my focus is not politics, it's on public safety. And I really think that the people should make that decision on who is best qualified to meet the needs of the community and oversee the sheriff's office.
Given that, do you think that the minimum standard, though, for an elected sheriff in this county is pretty low when it comes to law enforcement qualifications? What would you think about the idea of expanding those minimum standards to say that the public can elect a person who meets certain law enforcement training standards? Because there aren't really many now, right?
There's not. And I know that I know Sheriff Elfo and some other sheriffs around the state, when it's come up, people running for election that just don't, quite frankly, have any law enforcement. You don't have to have a law enforcement background at all to run for sheriff.
Right.
And again, I certainly would support minimum qualifications, and I think that's important. I think you do have to have a law enforcement background. You need to understand the job and have been in the job to be a head of an organization, whether you're a police chief or a a sheriff. So I certainly would support that.
Okay. Another thing that is interesting to me about your candidacy is you've had a successful career inside the operation of the sheriff's office, and as you probably have thought about in great detail, moving above that is a very different thing. You become much more of a public figure. You're out in the community, sort of setting the standard for justice and law enforcement and compassionate services in this community. Was there some moment or thing that made you decide you want to do that job versus the one that you have today? Any single thing, or what motivates you to want that job, such a public job?
You know, and he probably doesn't remember, when I was hired by Dale Brandlin in 1994, they asked him, a part of the question is, where do you see yourself in, how far in this organization do you see yourself going? And I hadn't really thought about it, but I said, someday I'm going to be sitting in your seat and I want to be the sheriff of Whatcom County. I don't know that I actually believed that at the time, but it came out of my mouth. But as I continued, I've been with the sheriff's office for 29 years. I've held every rank at the sheriff's office. As I moved up through the organization, it's really about the people. It's not, once you move into a leadership position, a management position, it's not about you anymore. And I tell people that all the time, and they say, boy, you're really not selling that very well. But it's true. The focus needs to be on the people that work there, the people that you serve. And as I've moved up, it just seemed like I know at this time and place there's a lot of challenges, and people have asked me, why would you want to take this right now? Mm-hmm. But again, this is my home. It's the only home I've ever known. And I'm vested in this community. I want it to be a safe place for not just my family, but future generations. And I know that based on my experience, one, as a lifelong resident, seeing how things have changed, some for the better, some for the worst. And then just my understanding of the sheriff's office and how complex it is. It's very different than a police department. A police department, you have responsibility for law enforcement. In a sheriff's office, we have law enforcement, we have corrections, we have emergency management, search and rescue, civil function. So there's a lot of things that a police department doesn't necessarily do. And I think that's important when you're looking at who the next sheriff is. The other candidate, he certainly has law enforcement experience, but when you look at the job of sheriff and the role of sheriff, I think my experience both in the community and within the sheriff's office is what sets me apart. So I certainly, it seems like a natural progression for me because I know I'm the right person for the job for Whatcom County.
So if you become sheriff, what's your top priority? What's the thing you want to accomplish the most?
My top priority is just very simply to keep Whatcom County safe. But if I had to pick an initiative for something like that, and it's not necessarily the purview of the sheriff, we desperately need a new jail. And we need a new jail for all the reasons that I've enumerated. But we have to, we have to work together to get that done. But at the end of the day, that decision is not the sheriff's. That decision is the executive's office, and it is the decision of the council with input from the community. And I think they've done that, but there's still a lot of discussions to be had before we decide on that. Unfortunately, we've supported funding for a jail back in 2004. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, we approved a new jail. We approved funding for a jail, but nobody could ever agree on what that jail looked like. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in now. So I think those conversations have evolved, and I think, again, people see it as it's not an or, it's an and it's we need treatment and we need a new jail. So I would say, I would certainly advocate for a new jail, not so that we can arrest more people, but so that we could address public safety concerns and then help those people in the best way possible.
Or just function. Sounds like you need one just to function.
We do have some infrastructure issues between elevators and doors that don't stay shut. Again, that creates a lot of safety issues for the people there. When they're there, they're our responsibility to keep safe, and unfortunately, we have to, keep some people separated just so that they don't get assaulted while they're in custody. And it's also unsafe for our employees that work there. So that's really what we're looking for, is a adequately sized, safe, and humane jail.
You have to have thought about the possibility that you might be elected to be sheriff and be handed that gift of that jail without an approval of a new jail. That could happen in this election. What do you think about that? I mean, how do you make that facility work for another number of years in its current state? And everybody's described it, your opponent has described it very similar to what you have, as just completely inadequate. And that may be handed to you as your first task. How do you plan to deal with that if that happens?
Sure. Well, we don't have adequate space right now to address the public safety concerns that we're all wrestling with. And again, we talked about it. Specifically, Bellingham, people just don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And that's not just people that are visiting downtown, that's business owners. So we need, anybody that's lived in Whatcom County, we all know what it used to be like to be able to walk downtown Bellingham to the different stores and restaurants. But that's changed, and we need to do something about that. So I would continue to, we've used contracts at other facilities, but jails around the state are struggling with staffing, and when you don't have the staffing, that's the other thing that limits the amount of people that you can have there. So Skagit County has a brand new jail that they're not utilizing because they don't have the staff. We can't contract with them because they don't have the staff to manage the population to assist us with our public safety needs. We've contracted with the Yakima County Jail in the past. We've contracted with Snohomish County Jail in the past. None of them can help us right now, but that doesn't mean that I think a lot of people with recruitment and retention, things are improving. And hopefully there'll be an opportunity to go back to some of those jurisdictions and say, hey, can you help us out with some of these population? The other thing to look at is some type of temporary facility adjacent to what we already have. But again, that's going to take more employees and resources to run it and make sure that people are safe while they're there, and we're able to monitor them for overdose medical situations. Because that's the other thing is, we have to check on those people all the time. We've had more and more people coming into the jail and overdose and require us to use Narcan, call medical staff just to save their life. So it is manpower intensive, but I would certainly, if we can't get a contract with somebody, I would support trying to, and I've thought about different options for a temporary structure that would at least help us with some of our capacity issues.
Okay. We're getting close to the end of our time here, so I wanted to give you an open-ended chance to just tell us, you've touched on some reasons already, I think, but tell us why you're the best candidate for this job, why should we endorse you for this position, and why should people select you as the next sheriff?
Sure. Well, I think at the end of the day, when you look at my experience, I've got 29 years with the sheriff's office. I've held every rank. I've had a lot of specialty positions. I've been involved with training. And the sheriff's office is a complex organization. Again, it's much more than just law enforcement. And that law enforcement and those services are spread over a large geographical area. So I have the understanding of the complexities of the sheriff's office. I've established relationships with all the other jurisdictions and departments, both state, local, federal, that we work with, so that we can provide the highest quality services, but also keep Whatcom County safe. That includes a significant budget, $41 million. So you need to understand the county finance, which is, that is a challenge, and I understand why they do what they do. Audit findings are not something that any finance department wants, and especially over the last couple of years, there is a lot of funding that has come into Whatcom County for the benefit of Whatcom County, but with that comes accountability, and somebody has to watch those numbers and make sure that we're using funds appropriately. So there are a lot of challenges there. Just the process for getting things through council, working with the exec's office and the other departments, I have that base of knowledge, I have those relationships, And again, at the end of the day, I think if you look at my qualifications, my training, my experience, the decision is hopefully should be pretty simple for the citizens of Whatcom County, because I think I am the best candidate for sheriff. Not to take anything away from Mr. Tanksley. I like him. He's a nice man, but I just think I'm more qualified.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time here today. It's greatly
Absolutely.
appreciated. Our reporters will be still, I'm sure, continuing to keep in touch with you and the other candidates as we do our reporting. And just a reminder to the public that pre-election coverage we provide free to the public outside of our paywall, because we think it's a super important part of our mission here is to cover local elections. And we greatly appreciate the participation of people like yourself. I know you have a lot of things on your plate to come in and talk to us in person. This is very helpful to meet candidates in person. So thanks for coming, and I want to also thank our news partners at KMRE Community Radio 88.3 who are here in the background videotaping for us today and doing an excellent job of making this available later to the public. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.